Hi, my name is Awilda Jimenez. I'm a virtual content specialist teacher from PS 386 in the Bronx. I've created this teacher-facing video in partnership with Maria Friedland from the Division of Multilingual Learners. Our goal is to develop content to support our multilingual learners and English language learners during remote and blended instruction. This teacher-facing video focuses on the Grade 4, Unit 3, Day 15 lesson titled Protests in Colonial America and Colonial New York. Our focus question is what events led to the war with Great Britain? And our lesson objective is to analyze a variety of sources and explain how the colonists used different forms of protests to make their voices heard. Now, the scaffolds in this introductory portion of the lesson is using the home language as a resource and building background knowledge. So we're going to revisit a slide that was used a couple of lessons ago. So here are some images of some recent protests that have occurred in America on issues that speak to the students in our community, whether it be Black Lives Matter or the protests on immigration reform. So here's some images. You could choose to incorporate a collage of images of protests from around the world to help students understand that protests happen all over the world. So we're using a guiding question of what are some reasons people protest today and how do they protest? And then later on throughout the lesson, we could compare our responses to the way colonists are protesting. Are there similarities and differences? Because the students have seen a slide like this before, you could follow up that slide with the definition of protest to remind students that when you protest something, you say or show publicly that you are against an issue. You can have students jot down what kinds of protests have you heard about, list them here, and what kinds of protests do you think are the most effective at causing change and why. They may not have a lot of information on the answer to this question yet, but that's okay. Because as the lesson goes on, they can revisit and add on to this, this organizer during the introduction. Some vocabulary for students to understand are peaceful protests or nonviolent protests, violent protests, and boycotting. Boycotting is a form of peaceful protests. And the big ideas in this lesson are that protests have happened throughout the history of America. Protests happen across the world. There are peaceful and violent ways of protesting, and protests can be evaluated as effective and ineffective depending on the outcomes. So as a result of a protest, are there new laws created? Is there a new government that comes in? Are there changes in policy? Do protests lead to the freedom or liberation of a group of people? Is there justice as a result of protests? Are there equal rights given as a result of protests? So these are ideas that speak to the history of America and what the current climate of America as we speak. An important video that could support English language learners and multilingual learners in understanding protests is this video, and I've linked it. It's a YouTube video. It's called The Power of Peaceful Protest, and it's available in several languages, which is useful. Students can listen to the video in their native language if it's listed. If not, students can just, they can watch this video in several ways. They could watch it with the audio on and complete a See, Think, Wonder activity. This is an organizer that can be used across the lesson if you feel it would support our multilingual learners and English language learners. So they could listen to the video, or they can just watch the images on the video, play it on mute, and really analyze, the people, describe their feelings or emotions that they see, and all those things can help our multilingual learners and English language learners understand what a protest is and how there's usually two sides to a protest, and what are the actions that people take during a protest. So once they, listen to the video or just watch the images, they could come back to this initial organizer to add on to the kinds of protests they heard about, or make predictions on which protests are most effective at causing change and why. Because they'll have in the video examples of peaceful images of protests and then violence images of protests. Okay, in colonial America, the colonists used different types of protests against British taxes and acts. In today's lesson, we will explore some of the forms of protests that colonists used to make their voices heard. Now, before students get to the independent practice portion of the lesson, you could assign this work either on Google Slides, in Google Classroom, for example, to our multilingual learners and English language learners so that they can get access to the grade level content, at least spend a day with it. They have this resource in the different languages. The Passport to Social Studies workbook is available in different languages. So they could study the image, right, the destruction of tea at Boston Harbor. And again, they could use, the same organizer from the video and just add on to it, making sure to note the title of this image. They could use the See, Think, Wonder, or the workbook has the Thinking About Images template on page 155 of the workbook, what I see, what I think, and questions I have. And this other video from that illustrates what happened during the Boston Tea Party in 1773. It would be useful to assign to our multilingual learners and English language learners ahead of the independent practice portion, even a day ahead, so that they get access to the content. And a question they could have and they could think about as they're watching the video before the lesson is, what were the colonists angry about? What kind of protests did they have? And what effect do you predict this will have on the British and why? So these are just some strategies to use with our multilingual learners and English language learners in preparation for this lesson and during the introduction portion of this lesson.